there and welcome. Before we dive into today's dialogue, grab a notebook or open your notes app. We're about to unpack some powerful insights you won't want to miss. Ready? Let's get into it.
All right, you know the image. The flashy car, the sprawling mansion, maybe a yacht docked somewhere exotic.
Yeah, that whole picture.
The idea that being wealthy means you inherited it, hit the lottery, or maybe you're just, I don't know, some kind of unicorn superstar athlete or entertainer. That's the picture splashed across our screens, right?
It is. It's the dominant narrative, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it kind of creates this idea that wealth is just out of reach for most people.
Yeah.
Reserved for the lucky few.
And yet we've been digging into some incredible source material for this deep dive specifically. Key excerpts from the book, The Millionaire Next Door. And what the data from this research reveals about who the wealthy in America actually are and how they got there is frankly pretty surprising.
It completely flips that common perception on its head. Our mission here is to really unpack what the data you've provided tells us, finding those hidden truths and challenging assumptions about wealth accumulation.
Okay, let's jump straight into the first big finding then, the one that just blows up that whole inherited wealth myth. What does the source say about where most millionaires actually come from?
Well, the most striking discovery is how they made their money. The vast majority aren't heirs or beneficiaries of massive windfalls.
Not heirs, really.
No. The research states pretty unequivocally that more than 80% of American millionaires are ordinary people who accumulated their wealth in just one generation.
80%. That's not just a majority, that's an overwhelming majority. So we're talking about people who started with relatively little and built it themselves.
Exactly.
Right?
Ordinary people. And think about the probability, right? The source mentions the chance of becoming wealthy through some sudden windfall like winning the lottery. A huge inheritance, a pro sports contract, is statistically lower than 1 in 4,000 over an adult lifetime.
Wow, 1 in 4,000. That's incredibly rare.
It is. Now compare that to the fact that roughly 3.5 out of every 100 households in America have a net worth of $1 million or more.
Oh.
So it is statistically far more likely to become a millionaire through steady, consistent accumulation than through some lucky break.
So the wealthy people living next door, like the book title says, it's not just a cute idea. These are actually the folks who built it gradually, diligently, right in their own lifetime.
That's what the data shows.
Okay, so it's not luck or inheritance. How are they doing it? What are the foundational habits the sources keep pointing back to?
The research identifies several common denominators, but the absolute cornerstone, the bedrock habit that really enables wealth accumulation is frugality.
Frugality. Okay, that's not a word that usually conjures images of mansions and yachts, is it?
Not really, no.
We're constantly shown images of lavish spending by the rich. Are you telling me the secret is actually not spending?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
The source defines frugal as behavior characterized by or reflecting economy in the use of resources. The opposite is wasteful. Lavish spending, hyperconsumption. This data makes it crystal clear. Being frugal is the essential ingredient for building wealth, even if it's the least glamorous one.
Okay, give us some concrete examples from the source. What does this frugality actually look like day to day for these millionaires?
Well, the research has dug into some specifics. Take suits, for instance.
Okay.
The typical American millionaire reported never spending more than, get this, $399 on a suit.
Under $400.
Yeah. Only about 1 in 10 paid $1,000 or more. Now contrast that. For every millionaire buying a $1,000 plus suit, the source found at least 6 non-millionaires earning between $50K and $200K were doing the exact same thing.
That's truly counterintuitive. People who are not yet wealthy are spending significantly more on status symbols than the people who actually have the wealth.
It illustrates the point perfectly, doesn't it? The sources also found these millionaires often wear inexpensive watches. They drive American-made cars and often keep them for a long time, buying used.
Buying used, okay.
Very few lease vehicles. Their spending is deliberate. It avoids, conspicuous consumption. It seems to be about value, not status signaling.
And it's not just about cutting back on suits or cars, right? This kind of behavior, it leads to building a financial cushion, what the source calls the go-to-hell fund.
Yes, exactly. Having enough wealth set aside that you could live comfortably for 10 years or more without needing to work.
10 years, wow.
The source notes that the typical millionaire, with a net worth of around $1.6 million, has accumulated enough to live for over 12 years if they needed to. That kind of security doesn't come from hoping for a windfall. It comes from disciplined saving and investing over time.
And that discipline isn't just passive saving. It involves active management too, right? This brings us to planning and budgeting.
Got it.
How widespread is that among the millionaires in this study?
Oh, it's absolutely fundamental. The research found that millionaires and their spouses are often meticulous budgeters and planners.
Meticulous.
Yeah, and there's a particularly telling finding linked to the question, is your spouse more frugal than you are? Most millionaires actually agreed with that statement.
Interesting.
It highlights the importance of having a shared financial discipline, often, it seems, led by the spouse.
So it's a team sport, and often the other half is the one really keeping the spending in check.
That's the picture the source paints, yeah. They share this anecdote about a millionaire's wife who, even after they were multimillionaires, was still diligently cutting coupons.
He's cutting coupons.
Yep. When asked why, she basically said she was doing what she always had done, even back when they had nothing but a kitchen table. She attributed their success to those consistent habits and the sacrifices they made early on.
That's powerful. It's not just about getting wealthy, it's about the habits that made them wealthy, and they stick with them. You mentioned some case studies in the source that really drive this point home. Can you tell us about Mrs. Rule versus Robert and Judy?
Yeah, these two examples really underscore the difference between income and actual wealth accumulation. So Mrs. Rule had an average annual income of about $90,000. Modest by some standards, maybe.
Right.
But her net worth exceeded $2 million.
Wow.
On 90K.
Yeah. The source describes her as disciplined, a planner, a meticulous budgeter who controlled domestic spending rigorously. She felt financially secure, used only 2 credit cards, one for business, one for personal, really for tracking.
Okay, and Robert and Judy?
They earned $200,000 a year, more than double Mrs. Rule's income. But they had only a tiny fraction of her net worth. They actually admitted that consumption controlled them. They had 14 credit cards. 14, and lived in constant fear about their financial future.
Wow. So similar income bracket, maybe even higher for Robert and Judy, but one feels secure with $2 million and the other is frightened with maybe a tenth of that, all because of their spending habits.
Exactly. And the source's conclusion here is pretty stark and unambiguous. Without controlling your spending, without knowing precisely how much is spent and where it goes, accumulating prodigious wealth is highly unlikely.
Right.
They strongly recommend tracking every expenditure, budgeting meticulously, and making it a goal to invest at least 15% of your pre-tax income consistently.
It really hammers home that point.
Yeah.
It's not just about how much you earn, but how much you keep and grow. Which brings us to another core concept the source delves into: the crucial difference between income and wealth.
Yes, and this is perhaps one of the most important mindset shifts highlighted in the book. They define wealth not just by a raw dollar figure, but by your expected net worth based on your age and your income cohort.
And there's a formula for that, right? A kind of benchmark they use?
Yes, a simple rule of thumb they suggest. Take your age, multiply it by your realized annual income, and then divide by 10. That gives you your expected net worth.
Okay, age times income divided by 10.
Right. And if your actual net worth is significantly above this number, you're classified as a PAW, a prodigious accumulator of wealth. If you're down to the bottom quartile for your cohort, you're a UAW, an underaccumulator of wealth.
So you could have a relatively low income but still be considered wealthy for your situation if you've managed to accumulate much more than expected.
Precisely. The source gives the example of Charles Bobbins, a 41-year-old fireman. His household income was around $55,000.
Okay.
By the formula, his expected net worth would be about $225,500. But his actual net worth was $460,000.
Double what's expected.
Exactly. He's not a millionaire by the standard definition, but he's a clear PAW for his income and age group because he lived well below his means and saved aggressively. He prioritized accumulation efficiency.
That's a fascinating way to look at it. It's not just about hitting $1 million, but about how effectively you're building wealth relative to your potential. And the sources also touch on a really interesting point about how wealth and income are treated differently, particularly by the tax system.
This is where the disconnect often lies. The source points out that for most households, income tax is the single largest annual expenditure.
Right.
But the millionaires in their study, on average, realize a relatively low amount of their total wealth as taxable income each year. One survey they mentioned showed it was around 6.7%, and another analysis using tax data put it even lower, about 3.66%.
So they have significant wealth, but they're very effective at keeping their taxable income relatively low compared to that wealth. How are they managing that?
Well, it comes down to the nature of their wealth. It's often tied up in assets that appreciate, businesses, stocks, real estate. They tend to avoid selling these assets unnecessarily, which defers capital gains taxes.
So it's unrealized gains.
Largely, yes. The source contrasts two women, both with $220,000 annual incomes. Let's call them Sharon and Barbara. Sharon had a net worth of $370,000, and nearly 60% of that wealth was realized as income that year. So she faced a relatively high tax rate on her wealth equivalent.
Okay.
Barbara, same income, $220K, but her net worth was much higher, $3.55 million. Only about 6.2% of that massive wealth was realized as income. Her effective tax rate on her wealth equivalent was significantly lower.
The anecdote about the IRS perspective in the source is quite telling here too, isn't it? It seems the tax authorities are very aware of this.
Oh yes, the story of Mr. Stern and Mr. Young from the IRS is revealing. Mr. Young apparently expressed frustration that while the number of millionaires was increasing rapidly, the income tax revenue for this group wasn't really keeping pace. He noted that many high net worth individuals have, quote, no realized income from her portfolio in a given year, and they actively structure things to avoid triggering taxable events. They might transfer wealth through gifts or charitable donations before death, avoiding estate taxes and the realization of capital gains altogether.
So the crucial takeaway here, according to the source, is that once you reach a certain income level, say $100,000 or $200,000 and up, how much new income you make might matter less than what you do with the wealth you've already accumulated.
That seems to be the key insight.
Millionaires measure their success by net worth, not by how high their annual realized income number looks.
Exactly. It's a focus on growing the overall pie through accumulation and compounding while minimizing the slice that gets taxed away each year.
That shift in focus from income to net worth and accumulation efficiency seems absolutely critical. Now let's talk about something that feels, counterintuitive based on how we often think about family and success, the impact of financial support from parents.
Yes, this is a major theme in the source material. They call it economic outpatient care, or EOC.
EOC.
Right.
Yeah.
This refers to significant financial gifts and other acts of kindness, as they put it, that parents provide to their adult children and grandchildren.
And the surprising finding here is
the research indicates that parents who provide significant amounts of certain types of EOC actually end up accumulating significantly less wealth themselves compared to their peers who don't provide that level of support.
Wait, hang on. Giving your kids money actually reduces your own wealth potential compared to if you didn't. That just seems to go against basic assumptions.
The data from the source strongly suggests this pattern. And perhaps even more surprisingly, the impact on the adult children receiving the EOC is also often negative, at least from a wealth-building perspective.
How so?
Adult children receiving these regular gifts tend to have less net worth and often lower annual income than their non-recipient peers in the same professions. For example, the source notes accountants receiving gifts had only 57% of the net worth of accountants who didn't receive gifts.
Why would that be? Why would receiving financial help actually hinder your own wealth accumulation? It seems completely backward.
Well, the source posits a few reasons. One is that EOC recipients often lack initiative and can become economic underachievers. They develop a higher propensity to spend because, as the authors put it, it is much easier to spend other people's money than dollars that are self-generated.
They become dependent, viewing their parents as a constant source, like a fish dispensing machine, as the source says.
Precisely. And the data shows that gift receivers are also significantly more reliant on credit to manage cash flow problems. They're basically smoothing things over while waiting for the next gift or inheritance rather than building their own financial resilience.
The case studies the source provides here are particularly stark, aren't they? You mentioned Victor, the successful entrepreneur whose highly educated children became under-accumulators.
Yes, Victor was described as a frugal, self-made man. His children, despite prestigious educations, adopted a high-consumption lifestyle. They saw their parents' wealth as something that justified this level of spending, essentially. They became Americanized, as the source describes it, into a high-consumption culture that their father actively avoided while he was building his wealth.
And the example of Mrs. BPF, the woman who received $60,000 a year from her parents for her business.
Right. Despite that significant financial cushion, she apparently had more financial worries and fears than affluent business owners who didn't receive such subsidies.
Or worries.
Yeah. The source argues that her parents, by reducing the pressure on her to actually generate profit, inadvertently weakened her self-sufficiency and her reliance on her own efforts.
And then there's the story of Sarah versus Alice. That one really stood out.
A truly compelling contrast. Sarah left home with basically no financial support. She had to learn to fish for herself, as the saying goes. She became self-reliant and eventually ended up a self-made millionaire.
Okay, and Alice.
Alice, on the other hand, remained dependent. Papa's girl, the source calls her. She received constant EOC from her father, married a low-income individual who was also a high spender, and became a typical UAW who, the source says rather bluntly, knows nothing about money.
That's a powerful demonstration of how financial support can either empower or, paradoxically, disable someone. The source uses a phrase there that really sticks with you.
Yes, describing Alice's father's actions. He weakened the weak and strengthened the strong. He actually hindered the child he was trying to help the most, while the one he didn't financially support thrived precisely because she had to rely on herself.
So while EOC generally seems detrimental to wealth accumulation for the recipient, the source does highlight specific forms that can be beneficial, right?
Correct. The key distinction seems to be whether the support promotes productivity and self-sufficiency, rather than just subsidizing consumption. Paying for education is seen positively as teaching a child how to fish.
Makes sense.
Also, gifts earmarked specifically for starting or enhancing a business are viewed as beneficial EOC, particularly if given in forms like private stock that can't be easily liquidated and spent on luxury goods.
It's about investing in their ability to produce, not just giving them money to spend. That distinction is crucial. Okay, let's shift gears a bit and look at how lifestyle choices, like where you choose to live, can impact this whole wealth building process.
Yeah, the source discusses the impact of living in a high-status neighborhood. While it might seem desirable, these areas inherently come with high expenses, property taxes, maintenance, upkeep, and often significant social pressure to keep up with the Joneses.
Right, the consumption pressure.
Which usually means high consumption. This requires a high realized income just to cover these costs, leaving less money free to actually invest and accumulate wealth.
And the research suggests many people move into these neighborhoods anticipating future wealth rather than moving there after they've already accumulated it. Is that right?
Exactly. The source argues it's simply easier to accumulate wealth if you don't live in a high-status neighborhood during your prime accumulation phase. Your domestic overhead is lower, allowing you to save and invest a larger portion of your income.
Another fascinating lifestyle habit the source dives into is their approach to buying cars. It seems like a small detail, but the research spends a surprising amount of time on it.
Yeah, because it's such a clear window into their underlying habits around spending and seeking value. The source found most millionaires are dealer shoppers. They actively seek out deals, they bargain aggressively rather than just being dealer loyalists.
Okay.
But the most telling group, according to the source, are the used vehicle prone shoppers.
The used vehicle shoppers. Tell us about them.
Well, these millionaires actually had the lowest average income among the different millionaire groups studied.
Lowest income.
Yeah, yet they had the highest ratio of net worth to income, an average of $17.20 of net worth for every $1 of income. That's incredible efficiency.
17 to 1, wow.
And they don't just buy used cars. The source notes they often derive immense pleasure from finding great deals, frequently buying directly from private sellers, putting in the effort to find value.
So it's not just a cost-saving measure for them, it's tied into a deeper satisfaction from being a diligent, smart consumer. Finding the deal is part of the reward.
Precisely. They are patient and willing to invest time to find value. The source contrasts a Dr. South, who apparently spent 60 hours a year shopping for a new car, with a Dr. North, a paw, who spent less than an hour annually on average and kept his cars for many, many years.
And the really eye-opening finding from that section was
that non-wealthy people were found to be less likely to shop around, haggle, and negotiate prices for cars than millionaires were.
Really less likely?
Yeah. This seemingly minor behavior is actually part of the larger pattern of attention to detail, valuing money, and seeking efficiency that seems to characterize wealth accumulators.
That attention to detail, the willingness to put in the time for financial discipline, it seems to extend beyond just shopping. The source also talks about how these millionaires allocate their time, particularly towards planning their finances.
Absolutely. The data shows a significant difference here. PAWs spend considerably more time planning their financial future and investments compared to UAWs. UAWs often claim they just don't have enough time or they're too busy, but the source suggests there's a strong correlation between this dedicated investment planning time and actual wealth accumulation, even for people with modest incomes.
And it's not just sporadic planning, right? It's more consistent.
Yes. For pause, this planning isn't occasional. It's often described as a regimented schedule they stick to. And they typically start this consistent planning habit at an earlier age than UAWs do. UAWs might engage in what the source calls shock planning, intense, short-lived bursts of budgeting or investing effort, but these rarely become the sustainable, lifelong habits seen in pause.
This deliberate, planned approach must also affect how they use professionals, accountants, financial advisors, attorneys. How do pause leverage these resources differently?
Well, pause tend to use professionals strategically, almost like key partners in their wealth-building journey. Interestingly, they seem less price-sensitive for professional services that help them with the core disciplines. Things like setting up budgeting systems from accountants, which help them control consumption and build wealth.
So they see the value in paying for help with the foundational habits, not just complex investment strategies or tax loopholes.
Right. And they hire these professionals very carefully, almost like hiring a key employee for their household's financial operation. They do background checks, conduct thorough interviews. The source shares that memorable anecdote about Mr. Martin.
Oh, the one who asked potential financial advisors for copies of their own personal tax returns and portfolio history.
Exactly. He wanted proof that the advisor was themselves a successful accumulator before entrusting them with his wealth. It makes sense, doesn't it?
It really does.
The source generally recommends seeking referrals from trusted sources, like your accountant or maybe successful friends, rather than just responding to cold calls or unsolicited pitches.
And accountants are often used for much more than just filing taxes for these individuals, right? They provide financial planning, budgeting assistance, even advice on distributing wealth to children.
Yes, absolutely. They can be crucial in helping pause manage their finances strategically. The source even mentions accountants helping UAWs implement drastic consumption control through cold turkey programs in really extreme cases.
Wow. It really paints a picture of a wealth-building process that's deliberate, disciplined, and often involves professional guidance focused squarely on the fundamentals. This whole profile feels so different from the image we started with. It makes me wonder if their fears and worries are different too. What does the source reveal about what keeps pause and UAWs up at night?
That's another interesting area. Generally, UAWs tend to report significantly more financial worries than pause.
That makes sense, I suppose.
Yeah, the source's data shows UAWs worry more about things directly tied to their lack of accumulation. Not being wealthy enough to retire, never accumulating significant wealth, maybe having their job eliminated.
Especially if they're employees, right? More vulnerable.
Exactly. Vulnerable to external economic shifts, like downsizing. They also worry more about not having sufficient income to support their family's spending habits and experiencing a significant reduction in their standard of living down the road.
Those fears sound like a direct consequence of living high on realized income but low on accumulated wealth. Predictable, almost.
They really are. Pause, on the other hand, having built their wealth through discipline, tend to have fewer financial worries related to basic security, retirement, or job loss. Their top concerns, according to the source's data, often shift towards wealth preservation and intergenerational issues.
Like what specifically?
They worry more about their own business failing, since many are self-employed, and significantly, they worry about their adult children who spend more than they earn or who assume their parents' wealth is basically their own future income.
Ah, that links right back to the EOC discussion, doesn't it? Their worries aren't about running out of money themselves, but about the financial habits and expectations they've potentially instilled or maybe failed to instill in their kids.
Precisely. And while UAWs worry, the source notes they often don't take the necessary proactive steps to change their patterns of overconsumption and underinvestment. Pause. Having established those disciplined behaviors, worry less about the accumulation phase itself and maybe focus more on the longevity and impact of their wealth.
Got it. And health worries.
Interestingly, both groups reported pretty similar levels of concern about physical health issues. Some worries are universal, it seems.
Okay, so pulling all of this together from the sources we've explored today, what's the ultimate profile of the millionaire next door that emerges?
Well, the core message is really undeniable. Becoming wealthy isn't primarily about high income or luck or inheritance for the vast majority. It seems to be a direct result of consistent, disciplined habits. Habits centered around frugality, meticulous saving, smart investing, and making that conscious choice to live significantly below your means.
They are often self-employed, maybe in practical, sometimes even dull normal businesses, as the book says. They are hardworking, diligent planners and budgeters. They are independent thinkers when it comes to their investments, and they clearly prioritize genuine financial independence and security over outwardly displaying status symbols.
Exactly. The typical millionaire isn't the one you see flashing cash on reality TV. They are the quiet accumulators, building wealth systematically through often mundane but very consistent financial behaviors. Starting early and maintaining those habits over decades seems to be the key.
It sounds less like winning a prize and much more like a long, intentional journey built on countless daily decisions about how you earn, how you spend, and how you invest.
That really captures the essence of it, I think.
So for you listening, what does this deep dive into these sources suggest about your own financial journey?
Yeah, it raises a fundamental question, doesn't it? Are your current habits and choices building towards true financial independence? Or are they perhaps prioritizing immediate consumption, or maybe relying on factors like future income increases or potential inheritances?
How might intentionally adopting just a few of these Millionaire Next Door habits, maybe tracking your spending more closely, setting strict savings goals, shifting your focus from income to net worth, how might that change your trajectory and start building that solid foundation for your own financial future? That's something worth seriously considering.
Indeed it is. A lot to think about there.
We hope today's dialogue sparked something valuable for you. If it did, don't forget to subscribe, like, follow, and share. Let's spread the insight so others can grow with us too. Until next time, keep diving deep.